Hey guys, it's Tom from Velocity. This is a 302, this is a Coyote, and we get asked all the time, what's the difference between these two engines? We see them all the time in Restomod Broncos, the 302 or the Coyote. What are the fors, what are the against, what are the differences? This video is going to cover those things. All right, so let's start with the 302. Obviously, the 302 is an older engine design. It's a pushrod design. It was originally available in Broncos when they were making them. And so the power output from stock is lower than the Coyote. It's going to be between 210, maybe 260 horsepower in those regions. And then there's modification that can be done on top of those, right? So from a power perspective, to get up to that 400 horsepower, 450 horsepower that people are looking for in Restomods, you're going to have to do some modifications. This one's got an MSD system on it, so it is going to produce more power there. The main difference, though, in terms of that power is how it's going to be delivered. So it's pushed up to that power versus having that power as stock. And power delivery then feels a little bit different in these engines. Coming over to the Coyote, which is in the Velocity, really popular option, super reliable, but from a performance perspective, the base performance in the Coyote is going to be higher than the 302. Typically, these are coming to us with about 420, 430 horsepower, and then obviously there's tuning and modifications that you can do to get up there extra. It's a more modern engine. That's the long and short of it. Dual overhead cams, fuel injected. It's just got more modern performance. It's a more modern engine. So these, when we're done with them, sit around 450 horsepower or so. Custom headers with a Velocity truck, custom serpentine system. It's just more modern. It's got less effort to get into that higher power range. And of course, on a Coyote, you can take these all the way up to over 700-800 horsepower if you really want to. Those are the performance features. All right, second thing, reliability and maintenance. Obviously, the 302 is not a new engine anymore. And so one of the things that you have to consider if you want to buy one of these trucks is, what's the history of that 302 block? Is it a brand new rebuilt block? Has the block just been restored? Has there just been some minor works to get it running okay, but is it technically the original engine? These are questions that you're going to want to ask if you're considering purchasing one of these things. In terms of reliability, it is going to be different to the Coyote. There is ultimately going to be some more maintenance that you're going to have to do with a 302 just because of that older architecture. So it might be more regular oil servicing. They do have leaks, these 302s. They do sometimes leak a little bit, which is something that you need to watch out for. But ultimately, they're going to require a little bit more love, should we say. Things like making sure the engine is warm before you really run it hard. You have to do that on all engines, but especially on an older engine like this, that's something to consider. Coming over to the Coyote then, and again, like with the performance, it's all new. So reliability is going to be much, much higher. These are the same engines that they put in brand new F150s, new Mustangs, and obviously Ford is Ford, right? They're out here trying to make sure that these things, for the most part, last. And these, we've got trucks out there with tons of mileage, obviously personal, company trucks, whatever that looks like. The Coyote can do 150, 200,000 miles without really giving too much fuss. You still have to service these engines, obviously, but it's going to be less regular. It's not going to leak or drip in the same way as an older 302 will. It's just going to be that little bit more reliable. Servicing is about once a year. These are also going to be more serviceable by a modern mechanic, right? So any sort of a Ford dealer, this could take a look at this. Any real kind of dealer at all, really mechanic at all. It's more about who do you trust to work on an engine like this rather than who can. Whereas with a 302, you're going to need to be a bit more nuanced about who you ask to service the engine. Quickly, we'll touch on cost. Obviously, the 302 is going to be cheaper than a Coyote. So if you're working on a truck at home and you're thinking about, hey, I want to transplant something into my own truck, and cost is a consideration, the short-term cost, the initial purchase cost of a 302 is going to be less than a Coyote. It depends on what you buy, depends on what extra systems you want to put on there. So there's a range, but they are ultimately going to be cheaper than a Coyote. Long-term cost, though, is also something that you've got to consider. So we touched on reliability. If there is more reliability problems on the 302, if there's regular servicing that you're going to have to do, that may in turn over a longer period of time affect the cost. Coyote, swinging back over here, like we mentioned, is going to be more expensive. That's the bottom line. These setups are more expensive. Buying a brand new Coyote with the transmission from Ford or from a Ford licensed dealer, any of those crate engines are going to be more expensive than doing a 302. So again, if budget is something to consider, you may want to look at the 302 over the Coyote. So the final thing I want to cover is suitability for Restomods, right? So how suitable is a 302 versus a Coyote for a Restomod project? And really, what are the pros and cons of fitting those particular engines in these vehicles? The 302 has got some things going for it, right? It's an easier installation, of course, because this engine originally came in this platform. There's not as many modifications that you have to do with the 302. Another thing that people quite like is the fact that the 302 obviously was originally there. So there's some authenticity elements to having the 302 in a Bronco like this. Final thing is going to be long-term usage. Most people, when they want to do a resto mod, they want to be able to drive the car. They want the ease of use. That's something that the 302 maybe lets itself down a little bit on, the things that we already touched on, right? Having to warm it up a little bit more, them being a little bit more finicky, having to maintain them a little bit differently to Coyote. They're not completely plug and play. They're not just turn and go. You have to baby them just a little bit more. So that's one thing to consider. Coming over to the suitability of the Coyote, and it's kind of all the other things that we just talked about, but in reverse, right? In terms of performance and usability, for a Restomod customer, somebody who wants to buy one of these trucks and run them every day, Coyote is really the better choice. It's just going to fire up every time. You don't have to worry about it turning over. It's got all the power as stock, so there's no modifications or major modifications you have to do to get extra power in there. So that's super suitable. However, if you're a home builder, there are some things to consider. Bit more modification to get this engine into this engine bay. As you can see, there's not quite as much space as there is with the 302, and there's some different mounting systems that you have to use. That's number one. And like we touched on too, cost is going to be a little bit higher if you're a home builder. Also, some people might not like that this wasn't in the original Bronco. However, it is a Ford driveline, so it's not like putting a Chevy engine into a Ford. And so I think from an authenticity point of view, you could probably argue that this is still the right platform to use. So we've walked around both of these engine bays. We talked about the pros and the cons of the 302. We talked about the pros and the cons of the Coyote. Hopefully you found the video informative. Ultimately, at Velocity, all we work on is Coyotes. We want to be the best in the business. We want to build the best product, most reliable, most powerful product possible. And that's what the Coyote allows us to do. From a reliability perspective, from a user experience perspective, it's just that touch better. But if you're a home builder, you're working on your own project of a Bronco, the 302 is definitely an engine you should consider. Things to remember, it's going to be a little bit cheaper, it's going to be a little bit easier to fit, but ultimately long-term, it might have some different reliability and servicing requirements that you're going to have to do. Also, to get some extra power, you might have to modify it with an external system. Those are some things that you want to consider. Hopefully this has been useful for you. Thank you so much for watching.